I like my coffee.
Moshe, what do I have to say? Where's Moshe? What do I have to say? Who's she? What's the first name? Althea. TH? Should we start?
Yeah.
We got Benjamin Klein here. We're in good hands. Okay, so first of all, we'd like to dedicate the shared memory of Althea Goldstein, the mother of Dr. Goldstein. Is it Dr. Goldstein from Chicago? Do we know? Yes? Tuvia, are you here? No? Okay. In any case, may the neshama have an aliyah, and b'schut our working on ourselves to do tshuva, our parents and grandparents and deceased and generations before, yourself for an aliyah as well. Tshuva is one word, but it has many connotations. And there are many different forms of tshuva, just as there are many different forms of human feelings, emotions, and stages of life. And tonight we're going to address some of these different aspects, which will help us understand ourselves better and understand what we're aiming at with tshuva more. The Gemara in Yom Daf Tevav makes a distinction between two types of motivations for tshuva. Reish Lakish there tells us, Gdola tshuva shezdonot naset lo kishgagot. Tshuva is great because things done on purpose, bizadon, become kishgagot, things done by accident. Things we do on purpose turn into things viewed as things we do by accident. The Gemara then says, is that it? Reish Lakish Gdola tshuva shezdonot naset lo kischuyot. Reish Lakish said a stronger statement, that bizdonot become not shgagot, they become schuyot. They become positive things. Gemara quotes a proof text pasuk for this. So the Gemara answers, Lo kasha kan me'ava kan me'ira. There's a difference between tshuva, driven out of love for God, and tshuva driven out of the fear of God. And I think when we talk about the difference in motivation, and obviously something driven by our love for something is much more powerful than our fear of something, much more meaningful than our fear of something. Rav Kook speaks a lot in Orot Teshuva about the psychological significance of this. In Orot Teshuva, Perek Tet, Ot Yud, Rav Kook compares tshuva miyira to electric shock treatment. A person burns something out of themselves. They become terrified of something. And Rav Kook explains that essentially what we're doing is shutting part of ourselves down. We are scaring part of ourselves into submission and out of our normal habit. The strength of life, says Rav Kook, is weakened. In fact, Rav Kook in Perek Zayin goes even further. And he says that because people see that tshuva done out of fear weakens who we really are, it keeps people from doing tshuva. Because people don't want to abandon who they are. People don't want to lose their excitement for life, their excitement for themselves. And in the third piece on the bottom of page 1 here, Rav Kook tries to give us direction based on this distinction. What he says is, Kisha'oskin b'tshuva tzrichim l'hagdir biyoter et mautam shel hatov v'hara. When we're involved in tshuva, we have to work hard to identify the essence of good and bad. Kedei shehacharata v'zazua haratzon michiyuv l'shlila yiplu rak al hara v'lo al hatov. He says, so that the regret over what we've done wrong and the shake of our being will be only about what's really wrong and not what's good. We shouldn't lose the good aspects of ourselves in the process. And then he says, V'od yoter, even more. We have to be able to identify the good within the bad in ourselves. If a person is passionate, they're using passion for bad, they shouldn't see the passion as bad. We have to be able to see what parts of the bad are good so that we don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. Rav Kook here is talking about trying to be cautious to ensure that yira doesn't cause us to shrink, doesn't cause us to lose our passion for life and doesn't cause us to throw out, to discard the good parts of our personality. There are many Achronim who connect this distinction of the Gemara in Yoma between Tshuva Me'ava and Tshuva Me'ira with a very similar idea that appears in the Raya Mehemna on page 2, which for those who are not familiar is part of the Zohar. The Zohar there distinguishes between what it calls Tshuva Tata'a, Tshuva Tachtona, a lower level of Tshuva, and Tshuva Ila'a, a higher level of Tshuva. The question, of course, is what does the Zohar mean with this distinction? And I think there are two ways of understanding it. The first, if you look carefully at the words of the Zohar, the first person he describes as a person who does tshuva from his chatoim, and when he does tshuva, he devotes himself completely to doing mitzvot properly. Okay, tshuva tachtona means separating yourself from averos and starting to do mitzvahs. On the third line, when the Raya Mehemna describes someone who's doing tshuva elyona, he says, it's a person who regrets the chovot. He doesn't talk about sins. He talks about chovot. He talks about things that commit oneself to what's wrong. Things that are damaging to one's essence. Not because they're a sin, but because they're inherently damaging. And when he decides to do tshuva, he commits himself not just to mitzvot, but v'yitasek be'oraita. A person involves himself in Torah. The opposite of chet is mitzvah. But tshuva is not just about moving from chet to mitzvah. Tshuva should be about deepening who one is, deepening oneself, involving oneself in things that matter more. A higher level of tshuva isn't just avoiding chet, and not just trading that for mitzvot, but immersing oneself in Torah. V'yitasek be'oraita b'dechilu u'rechimu, with fear and love, the HaKadosh Baruch Hu v'lo al manat lakabel pras. A person is devoted to the right things for the right reasons. That's why I think if you just look at the words of the Zohar, what tshuva elyona means. The Be'er Mayim Chaim of Chaim Chernovich has a different formulation, and he says, Tshuva Tachtona, second source on page 2. Tshuva Tachtona is traditional tshuva. It's separating yourself from the things you've done wrong. It says Tshuva Elyona is channeling the energies of what you did wrong to what you can do right. The Hebrew word which appears here on the top of page 2 is as opposed to hitrachkut, distancing yourself from what's wrong. It's nituv, channeling what you did wrong. It's the recognition that what we did wrong is wrong, but what inspired us, the motivations, the energies we have are not wrong. They're just misdirected. Tshuva tachtona is where we stop what's wrong. Tshuva elyona is where we learn to channel what's wrong to what's right. If a person sees how they're able to focus on the internet for 2 hours without going to the bathroom, without looking left, without looking right, without care in the world, think how you could use that focus to things that are really important. A person sees they have the ability to get up early and function well when it's about something important to them. How can they use that for the things that really matter? Channeling. Rav Kook writes, the third source on page 2, he puts together the two things we're discussing, and he says, in his Akdama to his Sefer Orot Tshuva, the yesod of starting to do tshuva is learning how to balance properly between tshuva me'ava and tshuva me'ira. Learning how to balance properly, he puts together. Distancing yourself from things and channeling things. A person who comes with a simplistic approach and says, only tshuva me'ava, baby. No yira. I want a yira. I just want love. A person who comes and says, only yira. Only fear. A person who comes and says, don't distance yourself from anything. Just learn how to channel. On the flip side, a person who comes and says, I have to totally uproot these things for myself. Any part of this taken in a vacuum is wrong. Yira, says Rav Kook, is an important part of a person ensuring that they don't do the wrong things. It can't just be love. I saw recently a video that was forwarded to me, the Muslim cleric speaking. And he said, when you get married, a daughter becomes a daughter-in-law. A sister becomes a sister-in-law. A father becomes a father-in-law. What does a wife become? A wife-in-law? I said, no, the wife is the law. Fear is an important part of grounding right versus wrong. But it can't be the only way that we're inspired to do tshuva, or we shrink. The balance between love and fear, the balance between separation and channeling, and knowing how to have all of them in our arsenal, how to use all of them right, is an important part of the right way to drive the right type of momentum to tshuva. So that's part one, talking about the different levels and types of motivation. Part two, which begins on the bottom of page 2, the ikar part of the shir, we're going to talk about tshuva from what? And in part 3, we're going to talk about tshuva to what? Let's begin with tshuva from what? And here the Rambam, in his Sefer, Hilchas Tshuva, his Sefer Mishnah Torah, really builds tshuva step after step to the different levels of what tshuva is supposed to be. The Ramban on the bottom of page 2, in his famous drasha for Rosh Hashanah, and the Ramban was not afraid to argue with the Rambam or critique the Rambam. The Ramban has an interesting formulation for the mitzvos aseh that he feels the Rambam left out. He calls them the mitzvos aseh that the Rambam forgot. The Ramban knew how to say it straight to the Rambam. So when the Ramban gives praise to the Rambam, we have to take it seriously. And the Ramban on the bottom of page 2 talks about how the Rambam's Hilchas Tshuva gives us direction about how to do tshuva. Before the Rambam, it was a bunch of statements spread around the Talmud. The Rambam is the first to organize it as a topic, step by step. And tonight we're going to learn in part 2 of the shir an excellent example of how the Rambam builds in Hilchas Tshuva. The first part of Hilchas Tshuva, the Rambam speaks about a person doing tshuva from a particular chet. Look at the top of page 3. Kol mitzvah shebetorah ben aseh ben lo taseh. Im aver adam al achat mehen. If a person violates one of those sins, he does tshuva v'yoshuv mecheto. He's doing tshuva from his particular sin. He's chayav to do vidui, etc. In Perek Beis, the Rambam starts elaborating on how the process of tshuva works. He says, "What's tshuva gemura? Zeh sheba liyado davar she'avar bo." He has the opportunity to do the chet he did before, and he refrains from it. In Halacha Bet, the Rambam speaks more about how you get to that stage. Sheyazov hachote cheto. The chote abandons his sin, removes it from his thought, distances himself from it. Aleph and Beis, the Rambam is speaking piecemeal. Tshuva from chet A, tshuva from chet B. And the reason the Rambam begins Hilchot Tshuva this way is because when the Torah speaks about vidui in Bamidbar Perek A, it's talking about a vidui on specific sins. And that's why the Gemara in Horiot, third source in page 3, considers an amazing idea. Let's say you have a person who is over the Isser of eating chalev. There's an Isser to eat the wrong kind of chalev, and he's over that Isser all the time. Can he come and bring a korban for a different Isser? For eating dam? And the Gemara has a day that says he can. Because tshuva and kapara is focused on each one separately. You're still a mummer for eating chalev, but you're doing tshuva for the Isser of dam. The Rambam, in the second part of Perek Beis and in Perek Gimel, talks about the next level of tshuva. Obviously, ideally, tshuva should be not just fixing a particular chet, but seeking to abandon all of our chataim. The Rambam in Perek Beis, Halacha Daled, right after the part we left off on, starts speaking about the derech of a Baal Tshuva. A Baal Tshuva isn't just someone trying to fix one thing. A Baal Tshuva is someone trying to fix himself. And here's where the Rambam speaks about the behavior of crying, of changing one's name, of trying to sharpen, change in whatever way necessary one's identity. In Halacha Hey, bottom of page 3, the Rambam talks about the importance of expressing one's sins. He's not talking about one sin. He's talking about one's sins. And he continues with this. If we turn to page 4 now, both in Perek Beis and in Perek Gimel. In Perek Beis, he talks about how the period for tshuva from sins as a whole is the Aseret Yemei Tshuva, climaxing with Yom Kippur, which is the time when we're all mechuyev to do tshuva. And then in Halacha Chet, the Rambam says, the vidui that the Jewish people have as our custom to say is Aval anachnu chatanu. Chatanu. Plural for all people. Plural for all sins. We're talking about fixing the bigger picture of our lives. Source for this is the Gemara in Yom Daf Pei Zayin Amud Bet. And maybe the parsha in the Torah that inspires this most is the parsha of Yom Kippur, where it talks about how we fast, we don't do malacha, we separate ourselves from this world on Yom Kippur, Perek Tetzayin Pasuk Lamed. Ki vayom hazeh yechaper alechem letaher etchem mikol chatotechem lefnei Hashem titoru. Yom Kippur is not about fixing a sin. Yom Kippur is about cleansing oneself. And in Mitzvah Yom Kippur night we'll speak more about what that means. But clearly, even before we know enough to fully define it, it's not about sin A or B. It's about who we are. It's about fixing the whole big picture. In fact, the Rambam says that a person who tries to do tshuva while holding on even to one sin is like a person who goes to the mikveh while holding on to a sheretz. The concept of Tara is either all or nothing. You can't be matayr yourself if you're a mummer for achilas chelev. You can't be matayr yourself if you're not interested in changing your totality. So what we saw in the beginning of the Rambam Hilchos Tshuva was the piecemeal addressing of sin by sin. We saw in the end of Perek Bet and Perek Gimel the Rambam speaking about sins as a whole. What's interesting on the bottom of page 4 is to see what the Rambam addresses in the second part of Hilchos Tshuva after speaking about free will and the things that keep us from doing tshuva. The Rambam in Perek Zayin says, let's look at it together, Halacha Gimel. Al Tomar, don't say, don't think. She'ein tshuva ela me'averot sheyesh be'em ma'aseh. People make the mistake in thinking that tshuva is only from actions, like znus or gezel and gneva. Ela kishem shetzarech adam lashuv me'ele. Just like a person has to do tshuva from actions. Kachu tzarech lechapes b'deos ros sheyesh lo. A person has to look at his conduct. V'lashuv min hakas. To do tshuva from anger. U'min ha'eva, hatred. Min hakina, jealousy. Min ha'hito, frivolity. Miredifas hamamon, from the pursuit of money. V'hakovod, and honor. U'miredifas ha'ma'achalos, the pursuit of food. Min hakol tzarech lachzor b'tshuva. These are sins? There's a sin called Redifas HaMamon. The Rambam continues and says, V'elu ha'avonos. These sins are kashim, me'os and sheish be'em ma'aseh. They're worse than things that have an action associated with them. Shebizman shadam nishka be'elu. When a person becomes attached to these, immersed in these, kashu lifrosh mehem, it's even harder to separate from them. Behavior is much harder to change than action. It's a lot easier to stop yourself from stealing than it is to stop yourself from wanting the wrong things. What the Rambam is talking about here when he writes in the last line, V'cheinu omer, Yazov Rasha Darko. Yazov Rasha Darko. Tshuva in the ideal sense isn't just about sin. It's about persona. It's about the kind of person I want to be, the kind of person I should be. A person, he shouldn't be in this world to run after money and honor and food and to be involved in frivolity, jealousy, hatred. It's a kind of person. And it's not by chance that the Rambam then continues in Halacha Dalet and says, a person shouldn't think as a Baal Tshuva that he's so far from God and he can't reconnect with God. Ela ohu v'nechbadhu lefnei haborei. A person is beloved by God. Kilu lo chata me'olam. Why does the Rambam start speaking about how tshuva can reconnect you with this loving relationship with God here in Perek Zayin? Why not in Perek Beis and Perek Aleph when he first spoke about tshuva? The answer is, if a person fixes all of their sins, but is a disgusting person, God doesn't want to have anything to do with him. If tshuva is a reconnection with God, it has to be a cleansing of our identity. It has to be that we become more godly. God, if he was in this world, would not be running after Burger's Bar. God, if he was in this world, would not be at a Moshe Vleitzin. God, if he were in this world, wouldn't spend his time with petty hatred and anger. To become better people. Yazov Rasha Darko, page 5, Yeshayahu. Pasuk that we say on the Tanis, right after the pasuk that Chazal identify with the Aseret Yemei Tshuva. Dirshu Hashem b'imatzao kira'u b'yoto karov. Seek God when He's close to you and available. Yazov Rasha Darko. That's the pasuk the Rambam quotes for this. Or similarly, Yechezkel Perek Lamed Gimel. Omar Aleim, God says, Chayani Num Hashem Elokim Im Echbotz B'mot HaRasha. I don't want a Rasha to die. Ki im b'shuv Rasha midarko b'chaya. I want him to do tshuva and live. Shuvu midarchechem haroim. Return from your bad ways. Doesn't say sin. It's a way. It's a path. It's a type of persona. You see a person who doesn't get angry, who isn't petty, whose life is about things that matter, who eats and drinks, likes when people respect him, but that's not what their life is about. You look at such a person, you say, wow, this is a good person. This is a model of what a person should be. This is a godly person. This is what we have to not only strive for, but seek to do tshuva towards. Rav Kook writes about this in Perek Gimel Avarot Tshuva. Yesh tshuva mechuvenet neged chet miyuchad u chatoim rabim. This chet that's directed towards a specific chet or many chatoim. And he talks about how that works. Next paragraph. V'yesh na'od hargashat tshuva stamit klalit. And then there's a general feeling. Ein chet o chatoim shel avar olim alibo. There's nothing in the past that's particularly bothering you. Aval b'chlal hu margish b'kirbo shehu medukah ma'od. But a person feels sad. A person feels like there's something wrong with them. They're not the person they need to be. That's part of tshuva too. Because tshuva isn't just removing and separating from chet. It's returning to the ideal form of what we're meant to be. And this brings us to the third part of the shir, third and last part. If we spoke about what motivates tshuva, and we spoke about what we're doing tshuva from, obviously it's very important for us to speak about what we're meant to be doing tshuva to. And I want to speak for a minute about this before we get into the particular makoros. The only way a person can get to a different place in life is if they have a different place on their radar screen. If a person's life is just about running away from things, but you don't know where you're running to, the only place you can ever arrive is back to where you were before, because you have no other place in your sights. And there are many sources for this. Maybe the first and earliest one in the Torah is when Hagar runs away from Sarah and the Malach finds her in the desert and says to her, where are you coming from and where are you going to? Me'ayin batu la'ana tulachet. And she says, I'm running away from Sarah. And the answer the Malach gives is, go back. And because that's the only answer you can give to a person who doesn't know where they're going. And in the end, Hagar, Chazal tells, ends up returning to her past, which was living with Paro in the immoral society of Egypt, because she had no direction of where to go. And that's why the Mishnah in Avos speaks about Me'ayin bata, la'ana taholech. Both those things have to be part of it. If your high school mentality, which is, I don't want to be sleazy, in the end you have no choice but to be sleazy because you have no other place you want to get to. So where are we going to with tshuva? So if we look at the bottom of page 5, there are two places in the Torah where it discusses tshuva. First is Dvarim Perek Dalet. It talks about when we seek God, God will be there for us to find Him. V'shavto ad Hashem Elokecha. Ultimately, tshuva may be from all types of things that are problematic, but it's meant to be to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And this is something that sometimes people forget. If you look in the Torah, nowhere in the Torah does it say that tshuva is abandoning chet. The Torah doesn't talk about what you're abandoning. It talks about where you're headed. Tshuva is about reconnecting with God. Now, you want to reconnect with God, obviously, you have to purify yourself from the things that separate you from God. And we have psukim like this later in Dvarim Perek Lamed, V'shavta ad Hashem Elokecha. Hosea Navi, who built off of this, Shuvi Yisrael ad Hashem Elokecha, the Haftorah we just read, Yeshayahu, throughout the Nevi'im, speaking about where we're headed to. And Chazal on the bottom of page 5, Rabbi Levi, based on this pasuk in Hosea, said, Gedola tshuva shemagat ad kisei hakavod. Tshuva is so great that it can bring someone all the way up to the kisei hakavod. If a person is directed towards God, we can get that far. Or using the words of Yeshayahu Navi on page 6, The same psukim we talked about before. Yazov Rosh Hadarko v'yishav in machshavotov v'yashov el Hashem v'yirachameu v'el Elokeinu ki yarva l'sloach. And that's why the Aseret Yemei Tshuva are the time for Tshuva. Because God is present. Yeshua Hashem b'yimatzao ki'oru be'oto karov. What does Tshuva have to do with God? It has to do with me stopping to sin, no? The stopping to sin is the hechsher. The goal is the reconnecting with God properly. The Rambam describes this as well throughout Hilchas Tshuva, but particularly shouldn't shock you in Perek Zayin, as we already saw, where he talks about a person purifying himself beyond just chatoim. In the Rambam's introduction to Hilchas Tshuva, he says, "Mitzvahs aseh achat." Tshuva includes one mitzvah. V'hu sheyashuv hachote mecheto lifnei Hashem. A person returns from their chet lifnei Hashem. Why lifnei Hashem? Why does Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, why do they describe us being lifnei Hashem? Because that's the end goal. And that's why in Perek Aleph Halach Aleph, when the Rambam talks about Vidu, he says, Chayev l'hitvadot lifnei hakel baruch hu. Has to be lifnei Hashem. Not just to admit it to God, but because that's where we want to head with our process of tshuva. Perek Zayin, after the Rambam speaks about a person truly purifying their character, the Rambam writes, Gedola tshuva shemikarevet et ha'adam l'shchina, quoting the pasuk from Hosea. And later in Halacha Zayin, the Rambam says, look how tremendous the great level of tshuva is. Yesterday a person was separated from God in a way that God didn't want to hear their prayers. V'hayom hu mudbak b'shchina. And now a person is connected to God. Shenemer v'atem hadbekim b'Hashem Elokechem. The greatness of tshuva is that a person can go from being someone despised by God to being someone loved by God. Because dafka, the distance of how far away you were, is a testimony to how much you care about your relationship with God, that you traverse that distance. The Rambam in the Pirush HaMishnayos Maseches Rosh Hashanah has a very powerful way of formulating this. In explaining why we don't say Hallel on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, he explains, because there are days of tefillah and yira. Let's read it inside. Lefi shem yemei tefillah v'hachna. Hachna means lowering oneself. Lifnei Hashem. V'yira mimenu, and fear from Him. V'nisa elav, and running to Him. Are the days of tshuva, as the process of tshuva, fear of God or running to God? And the answer is both, one after the other. The way the yira should be channeled is in wanting to yearn and draw closer to God, because one's afraid of the reality of being distanced from God. Not only afraid of what God will do to them, but afraid of where one will end up if God is not who they're connected to. If we go back to page 5 for a moment, I'd like to note one more aspect of what we're doing tshuva to. We look at Dvarim Perek Lamed. The second pasuk, pasuk Bet, said, "V'shavta ad Hashem Elokecha." But pasuk Aleph says, "V'hashevoto el levavecha, v'chol hagoyim asher yedicha Hashem Elokecha shom." Tshuva is meant to begin, needs to begin, not with returning to God. We can't find God if we haven't found ourselves. Tshuva needs to begin with a person clarifying who they really are and who they really want to be. If we have competing, conflicting emotions driving us in different, very often opposite, opposing directions, we have to ask ourselves, clarify, and assert which one of these drives really represents who we are. The only way for a person to truly find God is once they've truly identified themselves. In fact, we can take it a step further. How do we find God? B'shuvu ad Hashem. How do we find God? I've never seen God. You've never seen God. Neither of us are going to see Him either. How do we find Him? The Maharal explains the way we find God is by finding ourselves. Not because we're God, but because there's something godly inside ourselves. That's replaced in its full tahara every morning. When a person is mevarer, identifies, clarifies, and focuses on the purity within themselves, that's how we get to the ultimate purity that's beyond ourselves. That's where it begins. I want to conclude by channeling all of this into Shmona Esrei. And I think it's very important that we work on Shmona Esrei because we say it a lot. Note, I use the word say a lot. Right? Beyond saying, I can't say very much. We know the words by heart, but not in our hearts. And I want to tell you two things about Shmoneh Esrei in this context. The first is, we say a lot of things about God. He's Chonin Adas. He's Rofech Olam Yisrael. He's Machzer Shechina Letzia. There's only one thing in Shmoneh Esrei we say that God wants. He wants tshuva. Harotze b'tshuva. And the reason that's so important is, it's hard to do tshuva. A person needs to know that God wants it. God's there to help us. No tein yad leposhim, as we say. But what's even more striking is to note that there were 2 brachas in Shmoneh Esrei. Out of the original 18. 2 out of the 12 central brachas that are bakashos. 1/6 is about tshuva. One of the brachas is Slachna avinu ki chatanu. Machal lanu malkeinu ki fashanu. Ki ata mochel v'solech. We know by heart, right? And then there's another bracha. Hashivenu avinu l'toratecha. V'karvenu malkeinu la'avodatecha. V'hachazirenu b'tshuva shleima lifanecha. Baruch atah Hashem, harotze b'tshuva. Why are there 2 brachas about tshuva? Well, we just learned the answer. Tshuva means a lot of things. Tshuva is about being forgiven for sin. And tshuva is also about returning to God. And both these we address in Shmoneh Esrei. Slachnu avinu chatanu, machal malkeinu ki fashanu, ki ato melech mochel v'soleach. Forgive us! We don't want to just be forgiven. We want to return to God. How do you return to God, like we saw in the Raya Mehemna earlier in the Zohar? Hashivenu avinu l'toratecha. V'karvenu malkeinu la'avodatecha. V'achazirenu b'tshuva shleima lefanecha. Ki ata Hashem harotze b'tshuva. We know this is what you want. As we saw in Sefer Yecheskel, you don't want people to die. You want people to separate from the wrong ways and find the godly ways. There is no time in your life where you can discover godliness, where you can discover the nobility of the human soul as much as you can when you're in yeshiva. As much as you can when you're in yeshiva in this place. As much as you can on Yom Kippur. When you're not focused on physicality. And when you can think about what it means to inhabit a higher plane. I want to urge everyone to not allow themselves to be satisfied with tshuva that may qualify as tshuva technically, but not truly embody what we can be truly as godly people. Not allow ourselves to be motivated only by yira, but to find the source for Ava, for HaKadosh Baruch Hu inside ourselves. Not to be satisfied with the lower levels of tshuva. To seek the higher levels through Torah, through seeing ched as a chov and not just as a problem. And through trying to reach an understanding of what our lives are meant to be, that service of God can be a shalom and not the kabbalah press. To understand that our mission is to separate ourselves, not from the list in the machzor, but from the bigger picture of conduct. That's not who we're meant to be. That's not who we can be. That's not what's going to make us shine. And that the process of tshuva should be one that ultimately brings us closer to God, not just further from sin. And that we understand that we get there through the process of discovering who we're really meant to be and the beauty of who we really can be. Yafa tshuva. Right? The Mishnah in Avos says, Yafa sha'achas shel tshuva ma'asim tovim be'olam hazeh mikol chayei olam haba. What an unbelievable statement. A moment of tshuva that expresses itself in the way we act, inspired by tshuva, is more beautiful than all of chayei olam haba. Because the fact that angels can live beautifully is very nice. The fact that human beings can live that way is much more beautiful. Let's strive to be beautiful people. because all of us are. We just need to live it. May we all have a meaningful Aseret Yemei Teshuva, a cleansing Yom Kippur. And Shekach to all those who put it together. I'm familiar with Rav Cutler, Chizi, Wasserman, Beanstalk, Klein, who I forget. And as I mentioned at the beginning of this year, we devoted this year in memory of Althea Goldstein, who is Evan Goldstein's grandmother. For those who know Evan, he went to DRS, went to Yeshivat Hakotel, and was here. He had a wonderful Talmud of ours. And Adam is their brother, so I assume it's also Adam. Adam was here many years ago. And we thank Dr. Cliff Goldstein, his wife Dr. Janet Goldstein, for sponsoring this year and making this night so special. Yeshakov.